button on your speaker there because we want to hear everything you're saying. First of all, welcome everybody. Happy to see everybody in person. Man, it's been a year, it's been way too long. And certainly appreciative of our sponsor. Thank you, River Authority, for making this room available for us. And everybody that's here, thank you all for making the time to come and visit. We have a pretty full agenda today. Hopefully, we do have some changes. We'll get into those in a minute. But why don't we begin with agenda item number 1?
All right, I will go ahead and call roll. Brian Yanta, David Wegman, Doris Cooksey, Debbie Reed,
Present.
Nephi Garza,
Here.
Kara Tackett,
Present.
Jeffrey Carroll,
Here.
John Beasley, Suzanne Scott,
Here.
Steve Gonzalez, David Mock, and Stephen Klaus. Marty Kelly, Natalie Johnson, Jamie McCool, Gerard Bowen, Chris Robles, Richard Baggins, Susan Yablonsky. And Anita, here virtually.
Here.
Thank you.
And I do think that Steve Klaus is here. He just finished materials down.
Okay. Thank you. Kendall, do we have a quorum?
Yes.
We have a quorum.
Other than Anita, do we have anybody else here personally?
We have Danielle Goshen, James from the Texas Water Development Board, and Arsum Pathak.
Thank you and welcome. We'll go on to agenda item number 2, public comment. Again, we limit for 3 minutes per person. And just a reminder, we will do this, open it up for public comment at the end of our meeting. So if there are any other comments or ideas that anybody from the public would like to share, we can certainly do that at the end, in addition to this one. So agenda item number 2, is there any public comment? Anybody signed up for public comment?
We have not received any public comment. If there's anyone from the audience who would like to give public comment, you may stand up and do so now. All right, we can move on.
Hearing none, then we'll move on to agenda item number 3. I think we're... Yes. That's sir. Welcome. We'll go on to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes from the May 14th, 2021 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting. Motion, can I get a motion to approve?
Second.
Second, any discussion on the meeting minutes? Hearing none. Let's go for a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes for May 14, 2021 San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting? Please say aye. 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 Any opposed? Thank you. Hearing none. Move on to item number 4. Agenda item number 4, communication from the Texas Water Development Board. Hand the time over to Anita, who is joining us virtually.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So I just have a couple. I wanted to note that the technical guidelines for regional on the TWDB website, we just want to note that you all make sure the technical work to complete the regional flood plan follows that guidance. Also, Texas Water policy change, and we no longer need to review any subcontracts between the technical consultant and other firms that they are working with. That is all.
Anita, it looks like you muted yourself for just a second. Can you repeat that?
Oh, it might have cut out. My internet has been a little shoddy. I'll say them over. So just the first one, technical guidelines for regional flood planning has been finalized and has been posted on the TWDB website. We just want to make sure that all technical work to complete the regional flood plan follows that guidance. And then the Texas Water Development Board needs to approve the executed subcontract between the sponsor and the technical consultant. And I wanted to note that there has been a policy change from our last RFPG meeting where the Texas Water Development Board no longer needs to review or approve subcontracts between the technical consulting and other firms that they're working with. And that is all I have.
Okay, understood. Thank you, Anita. Move on to agenda item number 5, my report. I just have one item to share, just so that you know, we will have a chairs conference call June 23rd, so in a week or so. We will have another call with all the chairs. It's always a great opportunity to visit with the other chairs to understand, and we always have an opportunity to share and talk about what's going on in the other regions, what are some of the challenges that they see. So it gives me a good opportunity to get a good sense of what's happening. Hopefully by that point we'll have most of if not all the regions will have their consultant on board, and I would imagine they'll probably share some of that. So if there's any items that you guys are interested in me either asking the other chairs or keeping an eye out, please just email me directly any questions you might have, so that I can make sure and do that. Like I said, I am interested in understanding how they're managing and questions about in-person meetings and so forth, that I guess will get a little clarification as we move forward. But that's all I have. Just letting you know that we'll have a conference chair on the 23rd. Going on to item number 6, which is probably going to be the bulk of our meeting today. Agenda item number 6, discussion and appropriate action regarding the consultant's work and schedule. We turn that time over to Ron, who threw out his hand.
So the picture you'll see here in a minute, that'll remind you of what it was, I guess. So Dave, you can remember. Dave, you're giving me a hard time. But, I want to thank everybody for this opportunity to talk today. It's nice to get to see everybody. It's not in a little picture, and see everybody in person for a change. I'm glad we get to talk. Really have a quick agenda today, just to kind of show you where we're at right now. Introduce a little bit of the team, the people you're going to see, talk about the plan overview and the schedule, and then talk a little bit about how the data we're starting to collect, and other data that we're going to reach out to many of you for, and then stakeholder outreach, getting that started and getting a plan for that going. So, quick introduction. I think everybody knows that HDR is the lead on this, and on our team we have Half, Jimenez, Hanson, and Langford. They'll be supporting us to develop the plan. I am Ron Brandon, for those of you who don't know me, and that is me. I will be the main point of contact. I've already had conversations with Caitlin and Brian, and so we took that off and have started communicating. I've spent my entire career in this basin, and 100% committed to this basin. I think that was one of our selling points. So, and that's still true to this day. I'm not getting involved in any of the other basins. So, my assistant project manager is Mr. Troy Dorman. I'll let him maybe say a few words and introduce himself.
I'll just say hi. I think I know most of y'all, probably pretty much everybody in the room, but like Ron, I've been here in San Antonio Basin for 22 years. Yeah, that is me too. I'm shorter for this. Yeah, it's getting hot again. But yeah, we're really excited. We partnered up with HDR because we felt like, our teams were complementary. Of course, HDR is doing a lot of water planning. PAC has a very, very long history, almost 7 years working for flood planning in the state of Texas. And obviously, we also work with Texas Water Development Board originally to help with the state flood assessment that really was the genesis for all of the state flood planning. So that knowledge and experience is going to be real helpful to this team. We are also, I'll just full disclosure, we are leading several other individual flood planning groups across the state, and we have teams in other parts of the state working on that. But that's a benefit to this region because they're a little bit ahead, and so we're getting information constantly that I'll be able to share, across our team internally with y'all on what's going on in the other regions from the consulting side and kind of the work plans and everything that are being put together. So that's really going to help us to get started.
Thanks for that. The other members of the team that I wanted to be sure and introduce, they couldn't be here today, but Christy Shaw is going to be helping me along. She's been very involved in water planning throughout the state for HDR, and she knows the process, and she's going to help keep me on track. So her knowledge is going to be integral to making sure that we get things done in a timely manner. Other names that may be more familiar to folks locally, Brandon Hilbrick will be leading tasks 1 through 4, helping collect the data and figure out some of that stuff. Eric Stewart, Chris Parker, my counterparts in Austin, they'll be helping on the FMEs, recommendations, evaluations, all that good stuff. And then Linda Menace with Menace and Associates is leading the stakeholder outreach. There's a lot here. I don't expect anyone to start reading this. I just want everybody to know, we've gone through it with our team. We know the process. We know the plan. The biggest thing is at the bottom, and it's the timeline. This is the timeline at which we have to have everything done to meet the Water Development Board schedule. Starting in June, having a draft technical memo in January, and then pushing on through that to the August 2022 date, and getting that final. We've thought through this a lot. We have our, each one of the guiding principles, all of that technical information is now published online with Water Development Board, so we know exactly what we need to follow. Here's a little bit better. Here's a little bit more of a schedule that will probably lean closer to what you're used to seeing. So tasks 1 through 4 is really what we have to get done. That's the hot topic, hot button. 1 through 4 by the end of the year. And so we'll be running around with our hair on fire, trying to get that done. That's going to be the most critical. That's a critical path. And we're going to start these. They're going to be kind of working. We have different groups put together. That's why you saw the different task leads. And so we'll be working with them in conjunction. And maybe we may stagger start a little bit, but this is mainly to show that it's going to be concurrent work going on before we go. And 65% of the work is in this first half of that's due January of next year. So that's going to be important. That number. A more detailed schedule that I'll update you on every month is going to look something like this. So to kind of back up a little bit, we're finalizing our contract with the River Authority now and getting moving with that. So we've already started some of the data collection, and I'll show you kind of the things that we're doing that and starting to talk public outreach, public participation, and we'll need some, figure out how the group wants to proceed on that exactly. But this is, in order to get it done, you can see the tight schedule. And in order to get it done, this is what we're going to have to fall through. So every month, we'll have to update you on where we at with each one of these milestones. So we'll keep you abreast of how that goes for the first part. Here's another way to look at it, and this breaks it down into a little bit more detail. The flood risk geodatabase, we've started receiving those from the Water Development Board. We have the floodplain quill we'll talk about. Fathom data is coming. And then here shows some of the meetings that we'll have, check in at the meetings. Then we'll, by November, we plan to have a draft technical memorandum for you to see, for the Water Development Board to see, to get input. That way we can get out that major deliverable on January 7th. You know, that's so the crunch is going to be the time frame, right? There's a lot of work to be done in between November and January and after the holidays. So we'll be committed to getting that done, but just want to set the expectations early that that's going to be coming during that time. So just always make sure for Christmas for you, right? So anyway, so just to talk a little bit about the basin, Nephi and I have had this conversation. Wow, there's a lot of data right now. This doesn't even show it all. I mean, this is the floodplain quilt that the Water Development Board has. This doesn't take into account all the work that we saw. We had great presentations last time from Nephi and Dave, and all the work that they've done, all the projects that they've analyzed, PERs. You know, it's endless on what we could add here. Not to mention all the work that the River Authority has done in their master plans. There's master plan for all these watersheds that you see here. Some of those are still being updated, I think, and those are living documents. And so there's more. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of projects that haven't been touched in there, and I think that's a lot of where y'all get y'all list from. Both CIP programs get their list from, so we have to be cognizant of that. I know. Jeff is working on a master plan and getting some data out there. So we know there's in the upper basin, tons of data. So that's the process where we're going to have to start getting into and getting all that data. So a lot of the folks that I mentioned will be reaching out to you on that. The lower basin is where we know that we do. We still have pretty good information, right? If you look at the floodplain quilt, there's mapping for a lot of that, and there's still more mapping to come. I'll show you a map of BLE work that's going on and other work that's going to be done. But for a lot of the urban areas down here, there are some maps and different things, and we do know that there are some plans. So, but getting with the stakeholders down there is going to be huge to figure out what we don't know, what we don't see on the map. And you know, a little bit about the basin characteristics. You know, that's what's really going to drive down here is this rural versus urban type flooding, right? When you start looking down in this part of the basin, low water crossings are a lot bigger priority than home flooding because that's more prevalent, right? And making sure the school buses can make it to the schools, emergency vehicles can make it across during a flood, and so. That's going to be important, identifying those areas too. And then you get down to the coast, and that's a whole different type of issue and type of flooding with hurricanes and storm surge and the erosion and coastal habitat restoration that goes on down there. So we have to take that into consideration. And then log jams is pretty huge down there on the river, causing problems down there as you get farther down. So we know there's a lot of issues that go in, and we'll have to consider that in the plan. But yes, so the floodplain quilt has been provided by the Water Development Board, and we'll starting to build maps and each one. And in the technical guidance, it's spelled out. I don't know if all of y'all had a chance to look at it, or it's our responsibility to make sure we get that. But the one thing is the maps, the tables, they're very well spelled out what we have to provide, and so. We've already started looking at what the information we're going to have to do that. So we're working through that, gathering the data. We'll be coming to you someday.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
Couple of things. One, on that floodplain quilt, that, and I haven't had a chance to study it online. I've seen the icon, but just haven't really been able to go through it. I know that the Water Development Board brought in data that they had, but did they also bring in data, like, for example, what the River Authority has put together? Is that in the floodplain quilt?
Probably not. Probably as far any of the new mapping that the River Authority is doing, if it's updated. I see there is some preliminary mapping there, but that's like it's maybe down far like on the quad. I think it's a starting point. It probably started with the Q3 data, some of the FEMA data that they gathered. But yes, we do know that there's a lot of work the rivers will be seeing that mapping that'll have to go.
And then the other thing is, I've recently reviewed myself, the General Land Office has done a habitat, or a coastal resiliency plan. I don't know if you've seen that, and it's prioritized different projects, many of them nature-based type projects, but a really comprehensive look at projects that they've identified along the coast by region. And then they've also, the Corps of Engineers has also done some work down there as well. Again, those may be documents that we would want to look at as it relates to this basin, because again, we may not be in a situation of being able to, just time-wise, being able to determine our quote own projects, that are generated organically from this body because time. But those projects that are identified, many of them are not funded. And so I'm just wondering if those are projects that we would want to consider when we look at the coast to see if we would identify those in our regional plan. So I don't know if you've seen that document or not. If not, it's on the
No, and
website.
I was just gonna say that was thanks for the amazing segue into the next slide.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
And but yes, we one of the things before Troy, we understand that, and we want to make sure that the planning group understands we're not running a bunch of new models and developing all that. We don't have the time not to get that done. Maybe in the next cycle that's when you get into that. But this first cycle is taking the data that we have. So yes, gathering that. So the two big things that are out there right now are the BLE data that's coming from the Water Development Board. And as you can see, the San Antonio Basin, the upper part has been done. There's parts of the middle and lower basin, and I think George, you mentioned something like that. I think I was mentioning already. You did the upper part.
We did, yes, we are working on the upper part and we
So that's data. That's data to come as well.
that is in the flood.
Yep.
Once I complete it, yeah.
And then the GLO work that's being done, it's a little bit different than what you're talking about, Suzanne.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to bring this up that there's studies that are going to be started. They're going to be behind us, but at some point we're going to be able to incorporate their data, share their data back and forth. But they are behind us. But so the process is one of the reasons I wanted to mention this is that half is leading the Lower Rio Grande portion of that. So we will have that, and I think Troy can probably speak to the GLO work that's being done with their work. Right.
Yeah, and I know we were briefed last time on the GLO flood study, which I understand that one. This is just the
Coastal
coastal
resilience
resiliency master plan.
So there's actually a meeting this afternoon, obviously, to talk about Region 3, which covers our region for our watershed, right? And they are actively asking for input on projects that can go into that update. The update is planned for 2023, and so that's the time frame for the final portion of that plan. So yeah, whether or not we can feed some of those into here is still kind of up in the air. They're also doing a whole new update with model of the whole coast. I believe they even for that. So we've been asking about that too, about how can we get that data. So there's a lot of discussion right now between Texas Water Development Board and GLO about being able to share all that information with all the people working on the contract.
So yeah, there's the data is not only endless here in San Antonio in the Upper Basin. It's coming in from all places. So being able to manage that is going to be a big day. A little bit about the floodplain quote. It starts with the National Flood Hazard Layer, detailed studies versus pending. The floodplain quote is there's other tools that the Water Development Board has. The BLE viewer that incorporates all of that. First American Flood Data Service, the firm scans, and then as we get farther into July, maybe we can get updated on the Fathom data. That's just more information that's coming to supply that from the Water Development Board. And then we'll take that data, and the Water Development Board provided a structured geodatabase that all of this has to go into. And so as we put this information in there, we have to have it in a certain format, and then we overlay the floodplain quilt with the structure database. We can get our structure counts and identify new structures. It's all part of the phase 1 part. And I identifying and doing the, talking about the overall plan and description. And we can intersect those, kind of count the population at risk. So we're already starting to use this data and figure this data out. And so it's all important. Again, there's a geodatabase that's going in. I think one of the things I wanted to mention on the BLE data, as the BLE data becomes available, that supersedes, that'll roll over to Zone A. And let me back up just to make sure everybody knows. The BLE data is base level engineering. And base level engineering, the way that the Water Development Board defines that now is they're running, there's previously, it's a simplified version of the models. It strips out the bridges that aren't important, most of the bridges, and runs it with the latest, their geo-reference, latest LiDAR, latest, some new cross sections, new flows, all of that. That's BLE data, and that's transitioning. A lot of that work's going to 2D modeling now, so it's becoming right on grid and becoming, they're trying to automate it and make it faster. So that'll be some really, really good data that'll be coming out, and so it'll actually supersede the floodplain maps to get better. So just wanted to, I'm throwing out a lot of acronyms, and so when I do that, anybody doesn't know what they are, it goes on that. But again, the geodatabase is there's 25 layers to populate in the main geodatabase, and we have the template, and we'll move into that. So that's a lot about the data.
Ron, will the new flood studies that the river authority has been doing be incorporated into this, or no, that's going to stay separate? What's the plan?
Yes, that I need to verify for sure that it's with the Water Development Board to make sure that it's how preliminary will they allow those data to go in. I don't think it has to be final sign and seal. If it has to be final sign and seal to be included. I think it could be pretty
Local data, yeah, that's a better definition of what is can be used as part of this. I think that's what we're gonna have to do is see together the detailed studies, the BLE, and then what if Sarah has better information that she could see better.
It will just have to be, and I think the one thing that we'll have to be careful about is Sarah, is the river will be ready to show those to the public because it becomes the public information, and I know there's a process to it.
And I think that again, Aaron can talk to this, but I think that on some of the basins, they are further ahead, particularly in the urbanized areas, than they are downstream. That was my latest data, so I don't know, it could be wrong. But she could talk about that. But, I guess where it gets confusing is if you're using different data from the flood planning process than what will be going through the public process by Sarah through this, between now and 2023, it's going to be very confusing locally that we're not using that data to drive the flood planning process. Because I know that what we're doing through this process is not about floodplain mapping and regulatory mapping, but what the River Authority is doing ultimately will become that. And it just seems like these need to be stitched together in some way, just to make sure that there's not local confusion between the processes. We're going to be showing something and we're going to be showing something different. So I think there needs to be some understanding of how that integration is going to take place, so that at least in the urbanized area, we can understand that, the investment that the River Authority is making is actually driving this process. What would be horrible is they're making this huge investment of taxpayer dollars here in our basin, and then that's not being used to drive this process. That doesn't really validate the investment that the taxpayers are making here into that work the River Authority is doing. The other thing that I wanted to bring up as far as a data set is, and this came up when we were talking about this after Region 11 meeting as the liaison there, we started talking a little bit about how we're going to integrate climate change into the models. Because obviously, when you're talking about flood planning, you sort of have, everything sort of looks retroactively, right? You look at the data associated with historical flood data. Well, obviously there's discussions about, what's going to happen in the future, and as you're sizing things, you want to be cognizant of that. So Morgan, who is the Texas Water Development Board liaison for that, mentioned that in the technical guidance document, the climatologist does have a memo in the technical guidance as to thoughts about how regional planning groups can start to think about climate change and what kind of variability should be added in. And I looked at that document. I need to study it a little bit more, but I just didn't know if y'all had looked at it and determined how that's going to be factored into our region as we think about the future relative to climate change.
You know, we've seen it, we're aware of it, you know, we have our climatologists on staff. The biggest thing is it's kind of a process and when we get there, and I think that's probably gonna be when we dig into the future conditions, and how we're gonna incorporate that. I'm not exactly sure on the wording, there's a lot of wording that I've read, but I'm not exactly sure, in short, you can jump in. But what I know about it is a lot of it is regulated. We're looking at the 100 and 500 year, and so those are the big ones that are part of the plan. And so
Like percentage change for certain things.
There's also, also for the future conditions, there's like 3 different methodologies that are allowed in there. So yeah, we're looking at, I mean, there's also, under the BLE analysis, there's also some 1% plus floodplains for that may be appropriate for using in some of those areas. So I think we're gonna have to, pretty quickly gonna have to kind of come up with, I think, what we would call our existing conditions and future conditions flood risk for this basin, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, is taking the best available data from all the different sources and kind of saying, okay, we agree in these areas we use this, and this area we track, whatever best, and come up with that.
Troy, Ron, I mean, Suzanne brings up a really good point. I saw that when the city of San Antonio adopted Atlas 14, and while Atlas 14 is not necessarily climate change, if you will, but we saw that increase and that change, and it really had a havoc on many of our projects, such that even some of our bond projects had to be rescoped because the result was it totally changed the scope of it. Some projects weren't even feasible anymore. So I mean, you bring up a really good point, and I think we have to really take that into consideration, because there will be times that it might completely change the project that we may be doing. So we need to make sure we know.
And again, I think it's because, when you're looking at regulatory flood maps, that's really looking backwards and thinking about that. But when you're looking at flood projects, you sort of have to look forward to determine, what kind of volumes we're going to be thinking about, not only to mitigate the flooding that we know based on the maps that, regulatory is done, but then also projecting forward. And that's kind of what y'all think about. You have to think about both, even though it may not be regulatory, it could be in the future. You want to mitigate that impact. So that's what we need to think about as we're thinking about that here. And, when we did the regional water planning process, oftentimes the regional planning, water planning, we could make certain determination rules that this group would use. Is there going to be a point where we can say, these are the tools of those options or whatever that we're going to use, that then y'all would move forward in the planning regarding that? And I know that there is some ability for each region to think about how they want to use the data, even though, it's within the parameters of the rules, but there are some options, right?
Absolutely, yes. This is your plan. This is your plan, and so we can tailor it to the, like you said, to the means that we can in the water development board rules. And so, yeah, there's going to be little things that are different, but at the end of the day, when it has to be some sort of cohesiveness when they start pulling this together, and each region will be able to. And I think to talk a little bit more about that, I think Aaron's going to have a presentation talking about what the river authority's been doing later on, and Aaron, we'll just have to discuss on which data sets y'all will be comfortable providing and updating as we move forward. So we'll sit down and have those conversations. So part of the next process. So that's a lot of the data, right? We're going to be collecting a lot of data, and we know we're going through that. But we need to start thinking about, as a group, how we're going to handle the stakeholder outreach and public outreach. I think, again, this is one of the parts that you can tailor to kind of be your own. And I think every group would probably agree to this. Every group's doing it a little bit different. some people, and I'll kind of show you through the process of what we have. But I think we do know that we're meeting with all the stakeholders, right? All the stakeholders from the upper to the lower basin, we're going to need to meet with on a regular basis. But how we're getting that out to the public. Some people are doing it via a website and letting the stakeholders push that out. And others are actually holding doing what we're calling a roadshow and actually going down and having the public meetings. And I'm pretty sure that with the way things have happened in this basin in the past, that's probably the way that everybody's going to want to go, and we're ready for that. But I just want to make sure that that's the direction that everyone's thinking. Somebody's going to know we don't want to get the public involved that much. Some regions are rather they want to keep them like that. As far as the website and keep it not as involved.
I would push for all of the above.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah, we're gonna have the website.
And public. I
Yeah.
can't envision us saying, oh, no, we don't want to people.
Yeah.
On the contrary, I think we need to have all the options available. Any discussion, what you guys from?
I guess 2 comments I like to make are that utilizing even mail outs even may facilitate some of that outreach. And then of course having some night meetings so that those that work commits on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of times the way these go, especially as we go down Goliad, Kennedy, as we go down the basin, we'll have the stakeholder meetings during the day, and then later that evening we can have the public meetings, and then we can let them push that out. We can have mailers, and there's plans for all of that. And I'll kind of go through that, but that was kind of the question. I just want to kind of get a whole bunch of heads nodding. Yes, this is the way we want to go. So I know exactly which way y'all want to drive this, so I can work with Linda to kind of get that moving in that direction.
Ron, tell me a little bit about with regard to these outreach in both urban and rural. Have you thought of what type of data are we going to be trying to collect? Is it just going to be photographs with a timestamp? Is it just, hey, I've seen a flood here? What kind of information are you planning to collect in these outreach?
Yes. I think we're going to take anything we can get, and as we go through the plan, we're going to incorporate as much as technical guidance let us. And so, but it'll have to be tied back to a project in some way, as we move along. And so that'll be the interesting part. How do we tie floodplain issues to the project? And so, developing the projects or looking at that, we'll have to come up with a process in order to be able to do that. So yes, pictures, maintenance crews, floodplain maps, studies. I mean, the studies are going to be the best, right? I mean, that's what we'd love to have the amount of PDRs that the River Authority and the city and the county have done. But we know we're not going to get that as we go down. So.
And Ron, and the reason why I bring that up is, and Dave, we've had that experience of identifying a project just solely based on a floodplain. And we go out and we do this PDR, invest hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop it. And then when we go into design, it turns out, well, the floodplain map for the model, the original model assumption was slightly incorrect. I think you know what I'm talking about. And David and I have had a discussion many times of, what kind of data needs to support the decision of making these projects. Because we've had several projects around here that we have planned, we have invested funding, and when we go into design, it turns out that there was an error in the Manning's value or something, and it's not really as bad. And then it turns out we have all this funding to do, it's not really as bad as we think it is. And that's kind of why I'm asking, what kind of information are we gathering? Because I think ultimately that's going to really go towards making the decision on what type of project and the magnitude of the size of these projects.
Yeah, as we go down, we're going to lay a floodplain map out on the, for the stakeholders, right? So we'll lay a floodplain map out, and we'll say, where are your problems? Like, what are your priorities? Kind of the same thing we would do with UNEP, right? I mean, we would say, okay, what's your top priorities? You have a list, and I would bet that as we go down, Torrance, Goliad, those counties that they go down, they have a list too. And so we'll identify that and we'll see what they have to back that up with and gather that data. And so,
I'd like to make a suggestion also. I think you said something that I really like. You said putting out a flood map. Having been at the city for some time, I had a council person come to me, and it was kind of a big eye-opening experience for me and my team. Because this council person said, we'd like for your team to come and listen to the drainage problems we have in our community. And then she went on to say, but please don't bring in engineers. And I told her, Councilwoman, I'm an engineer. She said, yeah, but don't bring in engineers. And I said, why? She goes, because engineers will come, and they'll come and tell us what we need to do. They don't come and listen. So I guess what I'm asking is that when we do these outreaches, yes, we bring engineers. But we're gonna put tape on it, but engineers not okay. But what I'd like to see, and I like the idea of bringing up a map where folks can write on the map or show us the problems. Where I work at the city, we'll have these 311 cards that you have to fill out, and there are people that are uncomfortable with writing a paragraph to explain to us what the problem. So we've gone to this process of having a map and just draw it on the map, just show us where it floods. So I'm asking if you guys could do something like that when we do the outreach. I know we want things in a nice format, but there are some people that are just more comfortable showing us, maybe drawing or something like that. And I think we really have to have an attitude that we're going to go and we're going to listen and listen to the challenges that they have so we can better understand them.
yeah, no, you make a great point. And many years ago, whenever we were doing in my former life, when we were doing a lot of the DFIRM mapping, I did a lot of public outreach in the lower basin down here and along the coastal counties. And my job was to go there and just listen, right? I wasn't telling them, I said, here's your problems, here's what we say your problems are. Now you tell me if they're right or if I don't catch them. Right? And that's what you're saying. Lay out a map. And we've done everything with here's some stickies, you write it on, and then have 3 or 4 of them, right, where they're out, where they can come talk to me and tell me their problem. Or if they don't want to talk to the engineer or anybody in the room, they can go put a sticky note or put a pin or something where they can number it and say, here's a problem right here, and identify it that way. So there. The other way, I'll skip ahead one more. The other thing is we're going to develop a website kind of like this. I stole this from a master plan that we were doing. We'll put the floodplain map on and tell the community if you don't want to talk and for those who don't come to the meeting, you can put a dot on here and tell us exactly where your problem area is. So you won't only have a map to look at. You'll be able to do it by a map. You'll be able to do it by some pictures. You'll be able to do it on the website. We can probably do an app on your phone. Everybody wants to do one on your phone. And so there's a lot of different methods we can do. It'll all be, plastered on social media. Please go get on there and look at this. And so you'll have a lot of different opportunities to do that where you'll be listening and not doing much fun.
And I do think also, because there is so much data, I know, of course, the city and the county and the river authority have a lot of data, but also the downstream communities, the floodplain managers, the emergency responders downstream also have information. And I think it would be helpful that when we do move downstream, that, we do say these are some of the areas that have been identified by those in the community who, have had to do emergency rescues or are public works directors or whatever. Because sometimes, a lot of folks don't necessarily travel the entire county. They may know where they've seen flooding, but they may not know where other things have happened, or they may have heard of it, they're not quite sure. But some of that would be good as a layer as well. To say, these are some of the things that have been identified, validate them or not, add more, etc. That would be helpful as well.
I've been through the public outreach on floodplain maps, and you stood in front of people and they said, "So you tell me this is how it's going to flood." This is the best available data that says how it's going to flood and say, well, you see these pictures? See this picture right here? These are marks on the oak tree on where it's flooded for the last 100 years. And you're wrong. And it's like, thank you. I mean, that's what we need, right? It is part of the validation process. And, you know, we get a lot of, my pappy lived here, my grandpappy lived here, and, you know, it's never flooded. And I mean, you know, you hear it all. And so you do know that, I mean, it's not an exact science on some of these floodplain maps. It's the best available data. And so you can, I definitely agree with you, Matthew, on we have to validate the impacts. So as we go through, selecting the data will be important from the floodplain manager, emergency responders, and, you know, like I said, when we get down here, a lot of the issues are going to be low water crossings. And so, you know, they're closing them down all the time. We just had a rain, right? What better time? You know, we were in a drought. We were scared about doing this state floodplain during the drought. You know, what everybody forgets. How quickly we forget flooding, but luckily we've had some rain and it brings it all back. So hopefully we can get some.
And Ron, I appreciate you bringing in the emergency operations and also emergency management groups, because I think they're going to be a key component to a lot of the decision making that we do. But you know, you mentioned low water crossings. I really think our partners at the Texas Department of Transportation really need to be a part of this, because for the group, and I think you guys know this, is, you know, TxDOT has taken the stance that they design things from the perspective, from the roadway perspective. If it happens to be that it bridges 100 years, that's great, but that's not the priority, and that's just the position TxDOT has taken, and I understand that. The challenge comes in that even within San Antonio, TxDOT right of way sometimes becomes a challenge during a flood. It becomes an issue. What I'm wanting to see is we need to make sure and have TxDOT be a part of a lot of the decisions, because TxDOT bridges work one of two ways. Either they become a dam and they hold back water, or during an emergency, whether it's an evacuating the coast, if we don't have the proper routes, safe routes, or at least routes that people can use, we need to include that. I asked Ron, do you guys have, I certainly know in the firm you do, but do you have the capability of bringing transportation experts to help us identify what routes we should be going? You know, and I'm thinking smaller communities that we have that ability to identify, okay, this route needs to be accessible for emergency responders. What kind of projects do we have to make sure that this route is available for the public? I think transportation is going to be a key component in the input data set that we have.
You know, and when I get to talking about low water crossings in the lower counties, it's the same thing that everyone here worries about. It's the unflooded access, right? And there's several places down through here. I can guarantee that when the water gets up, they don't have unflooded access, and so that's, you know, those are the really, and that's what I see as being the big issue for the lower county, right? The unflooded access and the low water crossings, moving people around. I mean, you're talking about the city of, you know, Goliad County. They have one school in all the counties, so they run school buses from one end to the other, and so they've got to make sure that they can have unflooded access for that to get to all these people and safe routes.
So I was going to comment as well. So in Bernie, we're doing something very similar right now, and we did a dot map like this, and we had public input, and we did go separately to the emergency responders, the police, the fire, and the volunteer fire. What was really interesting to us is how very different the maps were from what the emergency responders and unflooded access, what their map was, and what they provided us, and what the public provided us, and us combining those together to try to find the best fit.
Yeah, I think when the general public sits there and thinks about flooding, they think, does it get into my house? I'm sitting here waiting for it to quit raining, not, hey, I got to make that emergency call and get there. And, you know, I can sit in my house and wait for that water to go down before I go out. It's not that big a deal, but they don't think ahead, and so we don't see that. And so I can definitely see why the emergency responders will come and help with that. But And to take that a little step farther, identifying projects can be things, viable projects for this, just throw it out there. Can be early flood warning systems, can be flood alert systems on low water crossings. So it doesn't have to be a structural, hey, we're gonna build a new channel or anything, or new bridge. It can be those processes, It's also looking at, do they have the floodplain development ordinances and things in place? What are the non-structural things to look at? What are, including ordinances, flood warning systems, low water crossing arms, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, and bringing that out into the lower basin where they may not be thinking about that and knowing about that, and to say, hey, you have a wish list here. This is the money. You may not have the money to do that, but if we can show the need, that's a project that can become real. And so, it's a message too that we have to get out to the stakeholders. It's, as engineers, we always get told you got to think out of the box. We like to think in the box, but I think here we're going to have to make sure our stakeholders think out of the box as well, and understand that think big picture. You have money here. Let's plan for it. So one of the things that
I think if you could, if you think about, as we plan these meetings downstream, you have our regular meeting. It would be great if maybe there could be kind of a workshop with those emergency responders, public works folks, et cetera, and then have the public meeting. Somehow that you're
Yes.
hitting everybody while you're down there. I think that would be very important because you may hear some of those ideas of those non-structural solutions that they're looking for, or emergency responder issues that you may not necessarily hear from the general public. But I mean, maybe it kind of be a 1-2 punch. You have this meeting, a workshop with those other folks, and then the public meeting.
Yeah.
I want to add to that. I know Extension Service and
Yes.
reached out to TechStop in the partnership with USDA working on HCS. And so they refer back to the National Risk Index, a few years ago. But that's one thing, we reach out and emergency responders and foundation, not just low river crossings, a lot of it, good indicator, but even back to the National Risk Index, this is what they have in the site, but even where we're looking at flooding, the community social vulnerability, community resilience, and environmental factors, about a more holistic view of this, from that flooding risk. So I know that's something that Extension could expect.
So to kick off, one of the things is we went and kind of identified, it was a GIS exercise, we identified areas. This doesn't have to be the list that we look at, but this is kind of an example of what we're going to recommend as something of this, where we're going to cover the basin, where we'll meet with something like Suzanne said, where we'll meet in the morning with the stakeholders and in the evening with the public. We'll provide all the information to mail out any messaging that the stakeholders would want there locally, and then provide the website that they can push out that we'll also push out. But this is, something like this where we want to have enough to where no one has to drive very far. It all has local. So the stars on the map show where people could come and be within 40 miles, be less than an hour, and identify. Now, we might be able to talk. When you start getting around the Tivoli area down there, that's not a very populated area. We might be able to find that with Goliad. I don't know how much information we're going to really get down there. That may be more meeting with the stakeholders. It's very, very unpopulated down there. So once you get down, just you're not down there in Refugio and Sinton and all of that. It's outside of all of that. This is a rural area with watershed. So. But these are some ideas, and we'll be working with Caitlin and Brian to come up with these, and we'll be working, bring it back a plan we'll have a more detailed plan that we'll bring back to the board. Linda will be here, and we'll talk about the different media outlets. The River Authority has some, the city, the county, everybody has their media outlets, and we'll come up with a message to put out there and be able to put the website out, QR codes, all the cool stuff.
Ron, what was the general timeline of when you expect the public outreach to start?
Probably at the next meeting, we'll come to you with a plan and lay it out, and be more detailed. And that'll give us we want to kind of collect some of the data, because a part of it is going to be figuring out what we don't know. And, so we'll come to the next meeting with a more detailed plan on how to get there.
Ron, can you explain the whole 40-mile thing? I'm a little confused.
It wasn't based on anything. We wanted to do 20 miles, we could do 20 miles in that feet. It was just something, we wanted to keep something under an hour. That way people, and all we did was
Under an hour.
from
that
each
center?
center. Yeah, from that center.
So you drew a circle around?
Drew a
it and said,
circle.
"Oh, okay."
Drew a circle. Sorry, that was confusing. Imagine a bunch of big circles centered around these dots. And so anybody in that area is in people are within 40 minutes of these dots. I think that wraps me up. I think I'll ask them with any questions. I have contact information. I have cards. Anything for anybody. If there's things that you want for the next meeting for me to talk about, please let Caitlin know, and I'll make sure that gets into the presentation. Next, we'll talk more about the data that we've collected, what the next steps are. We'll talk more about public outreach and the next step, getting into part 2, 3, and 4.
Great, thank you, Ron. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. On to the next item, agenda item number 7. Presentation on flood mitigation investments in the Southern Basin by the San Antonio River Authority and Boston. If you recall, this was a presentation we were previously going to receive, but had to reschedule. So that was the other one. This is what this is. Thank you.
This is a good.
This is.
If I may, just really quickly, our regional manager.
Hey, good morning. I'm Derek Bays. I'm the new GM of the San Antonio River Authority. Apologize for being late, but I was at a stakeholder meeting, so y'all can appreciate that. But I just wanted to say welcome and appreciate the interest, and look forward to meeting y'all in person after we get all the formalities over. Thanks.
Good morning. I know most of you, but I'm in the office as an engineer with our authority. And I've just been thinking about when my older son was 2, we took him to Disney World and we did this little thing with the Beauty and the Beast, and we had the kids involved, and they said, okay, everybody roll with the beast, and have 2 wheels, some roar, let's be preparing for that moment his whole life. This process is kind of like that for me. I've been with the community for my whole life. So right now I'm going to be talking about the River Authority's investment in the Southern Basin. The floodplain mapping updates were covered in the previous presentation, so I didn't want to go through those again. But we are updating all the floodplain maps in Wilson County and Goliad County. The second investment we have are the watershed master plans, and those I am going to dive into, and inundation maps, which I'm also have some examples of those. And then we are planning predictive flood modeling in these counties. But I'm not going to go into that. I just wanted to mention that during the plans. I'm going to go from the bottom up. Goliad County was included in our holistic watershed master plan for Wilson County and Goliad County. That was completed in 2015. And this master plan, so it included flood risk, water quality, stream restoration, all these things. The flood risk aspect was developed combining both modeling results and floodplain mapping data and stakeholder input. And a lot of the problems that have been identified were the result of stakeholder input more than the floodplain mapping data. And I know that's not a little bit this morning. So the notes on those meetings are in the report. So most of the flood risk is concentrated in the city of Goliad and the Resac, which is actually in the Waterloo River Basin. So that's what those squares are. So focusing on Goliad, you can see the rectangles around the flood risk areas. The property elevation produced the greatest benefit cost ratio. So this was recommended for all structures at risk for flooding from the San Antonio River. So that's area B and most of area C. And then vegetated swales were proposed for area A. That's kind of a drainage going through some properties, and they can put swales alongside the roads to capture that flooding. And then detention was proposed upstream of area B. In area C, there are some culverts upgraded in that proportion that reduced the flooding around Highway 59. So that was something that was done and not already captured in the modeling. And when they reevaluated it, they determined that flood was reduced. Torrance County is also included in the holistic watershed master plan. Much of the building flood risk was adjacent to the San Antonio River, and that had similar recommendations as those in Goliad, property elevation, for the most part. And so that's like areas of A and B map that you can see these letters. A is Fall City. I did a site visit to Fall City and spoke with them and observed that a lot of those properties are elevated. So that's an area that more detail would be beneficial. They also have next to the bridge a railroad, an abandoned railroad. That's what they were asking about. Could they remove that and reduce the flood risk? And really, the topography is the constraint. It's not so much that railroad, but it wouldn't hurt to get rid of it if that's feasible. There's also a concentration of flood risk in Kennedy. So that has several spheres, and I'm going to go into that in the next slide in a second. Then the remaining areas, C, D, and F, those are major stream crossings that have high flood risk and really highlights what y'all were talking about earlier with the low water crossing. A lot of these were brought to attention by the emergency responders.
I have a question. Where I have it where I am is what's the flood standard when you're making these plans for? What are you going to
The main one is the 100-year, but we do analyze where we have the data. We do the 10, 50, 100, and 500.
Okay, so it's not really an intensity duration, it's a total flood that you're looking at.
Yeah, so the 100-year is usually a 24-hour storm, and depending on where you are, that intensity is varies. The PCM is like 11 inches, 11 inches.
Steve, I'm not sure this is where you're getting to, but I know that an 100-year event is a big event. I mean, that's huge. But sometimes a 25-year, 10-year event that floods an area, maybe that's all the level of protection we can maybe afford or we can do based on the topography. And I don't know if that's kind of where you're going to, because I know sometimes in a home, you may not be able to do the 100 years because it's cost prohibitive or the terrain. But even if we do a 10-year event, that's going to bring in quite a bit of help that may be needed. So I think, and I'm not sure if that's kind of where you're going with it, but I do know that sometimes any help, any help we can afford, I think sometimes more.
That's generally what I was asking. It's very confusing for the public when you have 100-year events that occur at some frequency. And if we use a 100-year standard, something still gets flooded out, even though it didn't meet 100-year criteria, then everything gets discredited on the year. So it's just good to know what actually 11-inch rainfall in 24-hour period is probably an easier measure for people to digest the content business as to what they're doing. If I got that right.
I'll get a little bit into the frequency on the roads and the few sides. but it's still not addressing the design storm. So in this area, they did an analysis of emergency routes, and they identified that Falls City and Lundy were largely isolated from hospitals during floods. So we'll go into Kennedy a little closer. There are a couple areas that I think these were flagged by local subject matter experts. And when we looked at our data, they determined it needed additional study. So that was area G and area I. And these have been passed on. Karnes County received a flood infrastructure fund grant to do further study, and these will be included in their study. And then area H, their recommendations are raised by 189 or create an early warning system in this area. And then in Wilson County, this was in both the Holistic Watershed Master Plan and in this for Wilson County, Goliad counties. And it had individual studies for each community. So Floresville, Livonia, Stockdale, they all have a specific master plan for flood risk. And then there's the Cibolo Creek Holistic Watershed Master Plan that covered the areas in the Cibolo. So the countywide study really focused on the low water crossings, and it's a little hard to see all the dots, but there are 9 low water crossings or creek crossings that were recommended for improvement, and then 1 new road that would improve emergency access routes, and that's the line that yeah, it used to get then on the next slide, we have the screenshots of where the recommendations are in Floresville, Stockdale, and Livonia. We have a combination of detention, channel improvements, and culvert improvements. The second one in Floresville, they were looking at pursuing. I don't have an update on the status with that. It's a drainage swale through their downtown. And then in Stockdale, Bank Aiken is your man. He knows the ins and outs of everything that floods, where our floodplains are wrong, and we are restudying the floodplains. But there's an opportunity for channel restoration through the main part of town. He will show up wherever you have him. He's very passionate. He knows so on the creeks and rivers crossings, this is a list, and it's not meant for you to see the actual names of the streets. This is a list from the Cibolo Watershed Master Plan. These are major safety concerns in all rural areas, and in the Cibolo, all of the roads we had hydraulic data for were problems. And so we said, well, how do we figure out which ones are the biggest problems? And they started by looking at which ones fled by the most frequently. And even then, we ended up with 50 roads that needed to be improved, and we just think that's not a starting point. So they went through an analysis combining the flood frequency and depth. So it's like, how frequently is it hazardous? And then they used the average daily traffic data, and that still gave us a list of like 20. And then they looked at the distance to the nearest safe crossing. And that's where we started to see results. So that's where the highlighted ones come in. You can see a number of them jump up to the top. Those results started to reflect what we were hearing from stakeholders. So that is outlined, and we're happy to share it with anyone who's interested in that process.
A quick question. So in each of these studies, do we have a sense of those identified, what has been funded otherwise, what is just sitting there as
They're
a
mostly sitting there.
They're mostly sitting there.
Yeah, this is an area that there's not a huge funding partner, and this process is golden. This is going to open up some opportunities, I think, for these projects to move forward. So the other investment I have in the presentation is the inundation maps, and these are produced for each gauge, USGS gauge, and Wilson County Area. That's one in there. So these are maps that show, depending on the gauge level that's published by USGS, you can see what the inundation expense is expected to be. So it's a real time where are people flooding right now. On the left it has the gauges, and then this on the right it's showing one of the gauges and how the inundation maps extend to 3 panels. So depending on where you're trying to see, you have to pick a different panel. And then the next slide has a lookup table for the depths. This is very complicated. Like an app would be better, but we're worried about places that lose internet access. So there's a backup resource for land management internet access. You look up the depth, and then you can find the page that map is printed on. And it has the major flood, moderate flood, and like a watch level identified on each. So this final slide is just showing the extent of the river basin, and I was talking about Wilson Farms and Goliad County. But in our role as a cooperating technical partner with FEMA, we work a lot with the areas upstream as well, and there are lots of rural areas upstream. So I just wanted to show how much of the watershed is out there, not covered by these master plans. And we know that places like Bandera has a flood warning system they work on, and they've done a lot of planning work. Bernie, Bulverde, Cibolo, they're outside of our jurisdiction and not really covered by our master plans. They are doing a lot of planning work along these lines, so I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you for the presentation. You roar loud. Any questions that you guys may have for him? Let's move on to the next item. Looking forward to this one, the presentation on nature-based solutions. And
it looks like I have to restart GoToMeetings in order to share my screen, unless anybody else has a different solution.
Let me make you a presenter and see if that will fix it. Does that work?
All right. No, it says I can't. I need to restart. Locating system preferences. Sorry about this. Arson, can you share your screen?
No, it says the same thing here.
Okay, we'll jump to the next item while y'all are working on this. If you would just let me know when you're able to log back on, we'll get y'all started.
Sounds good. Sorry about that, guys.
okay, we'll go on to the next item. The next item, item number 9, presentation by the USGS. We're going to reschedule that meeting. We're going to hear that meeting, hear that presentation in August at the request of the USGS. So we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is the updates by the liaisons, and we'll start off with Region 10.
Region 10 is slacking because I went on vacation, so I did not attend the May meeting. You know, I have a 2020 travel budget that needs to get spent in 2021. We actually have a meeting on Monday, and so I will have more update for the next meeting. They're about where we are, a little bit ahead with consultants, and you know, we have all of their public meetings. So I'll have a full report next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for starting.
Region 11.
Yes, thank you. So Region 11 is the Guadalupe region, and they met on June the 2nd. They did have kind of a hybrid meeting at the GBRA River Annex and the Go-To meeting. It was a good meeting. They had a presentation from their consultants as well, and they're starting the process just like was outlined with us today. A couple of things that they are starting is that they are looking at their public meeting process. They're going to do their second pre-planning public input meeting on August the 4th, and they are going to be doing that either in Wimberley or in Comfort or Victoria. They're just trying to figure out exactly the location, but they are going to have their second pre-planning meeting, public meeting, somewhere else in the basin. And then their next meeting is going to be, they've moved their July meeting to June 30th at 2 o'clock, and that will be in person only. And they're going to get a presentation from the Water Development Board on the National Flood Insurance Program. And again, we did talk about quite a bit within that group, some of the decision-making processes that they're going to be using, some of the rules that are going to be required for that basin, including, like I mentioned, they talked a little bit about the climate, the climate conditions they're going to be using going forward. They're also going to be thinking about what modeling and mapping they're going to also be using. So again, I think they're about where we are with our process.
Thank you for that update today. Region 13.
Yeah, they're all going through their public input meetings right now. The next one's going to be June 28th. It's going to be via Zoom at 1 p.m. But that's where they are. They're a little bit further along than we are because we've already started the public meetings. But I don't have anything else to report until after they get these and have a regular meeting with them.
Do you have a report on how their public meetings are going along?
Yeah,
heard from.
I know they had one, I believe it was out late, and it went very well. It was in person, but this one's going to be Zoom. So. But yeah, I think that's the only one they've had since.
Thank you, David. And I believe item number 8, I think we're ready to go. So Danielle, if you could introduce yourself and with what, who else is on the call and what group are you with? And,
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Goshen, and I am the Water Policy and Outreach Specialist at Galveston Bay Foundation. And I will be presenting today with my colleague, Dr. Arsam Pathak. Can you see our notes and everything else right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Let's see. All right. Let's see. One more second. You can still see that.
That's true. Now it's fine.
Okay.
We won't judge you for being prepared.
All right, and I will hand it off to Dr. Pathak to start the presentation.
Thanks, Danielle, and good morning, everyone. My name is Arsam, and I am the Adaptation and Coastal Resilience Specialist at National Wildlife Federation. So I want to begin by thanking you all for the opportunity to speak here today, and honestly, all the work you're doing for the flood planning groups and protecting your communities. I think it's really commendable. So as Danielle mentioned, she is the Water Policy and Outreach Specialist from Galveston Bay Foundation. And Danielle and I, we both work together on the Texas Living Waters project. And our project is basically a collaboration of different conservation groups. And the collective goal of our project is to improve the freshwater management. And then another aspect where we are heavily involved in at Texas Living Waters project is natural and nature-based projects. So we have been heavily advocating for nature-based solutions throughout the development of State Bill 8, and even as the Water Development Board develops their guidance and regulations for the flood planning group. I think Anita mentioned some of these earlier. And this particular focus of our work also brings us here today. So we really think nature-based solutions are central to the work you're all doing, and we want to use this opportunity to sort of bring conversations about nature-based solutions and also get a deeper understanding of the role that they can play in flood mitigation planning. I do want to mention that our goal is to serve as a resource in your planning process, and hopefully to provide you the information so that you can go ahead and make informed decisions about your region's future as it relates to flood planning. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate the overarching goal of our presentation, it is to give everyone a baseline understanding of nature-based solutions and their applications. And this is just a brief outline of the topics we will cover today. And of course, if you have any questions, Danielle and I would both be more than happy to address them at the end of our presentation. Next slide. So Texas Administrative Code, it actually requires the regional flood planning groups to describe, identify, and evaluate natural flood mitigation features in their regional flood planning. And this is sort of the big picture idea or impetus for our work as well. Now, moving on, next slide. So I want to take a step back and just talk about the extent of flooding concerns in the region. So we are already seeing flood vulnerabilities caused by extreme precipitation, hurricanes, and even high tide or nuisance flooding. And with increasing climate variability, these vulnerabilities are expected to increase even more in the future. So if you see these maps, and anyone who may not be familiar with the term, a 100-year rainfall is a rainfall event that has a 1% probability of happening in any given year. So the maps that it shows is NOAA Atlas 14, which superseded the USGS rainfall estimates from 2004. And the NOAA Atlas 14 is interesting in that it includes data from Harvey and other huge storms, and it also includes single-day extreme precipitation events such as the Tax Day flood and the Memorial Day flooding. Now, I'm sure the fact that you're here means that you all understand the flooding concerns in your region, but the basic idea and what the data shows here is that the 100-year rainfall will significantly increase for the entire state. And this, of course, includes the San Antonio River Basin. There's about 30% or more increase, especially along the areas of high development and areas surrounding coastal basins due to hurricanes. And we saw this in the previous presentation, and I heard some of you voicing concerns about climate change. So I'm a climate scientist by training, and I do want to mention this assessment that we conducted at National Wildlife Federation, particularly for the Mid-Coast region, including the downstream region and Lower San Antonio Basin, in which we evaluated sea level rise and storm surge and sea level rise and storm surge combined based on the best available science and data sets and how it will impact the San Antonio Bay and the surrounding counties. There's also a lot of detailed maps and data sets for the coastal section. And we also highlight the extent of nature-based projects in the region. So I would love to share that with all of you, and I think it would be a great resource. Well, I'm moving on. Particularly for Region 12, the San Antonio region, there's also an increase in the development and impervious surface area, which will further exacerbate the extent of flooding concerns. So the figures that you see on the slide, these are from NOAA's land cover data for the lower San Antonio watershed, and it covers most of Region 12. So the thing that I want to point out here is that there's an almost 30% increase in impervious surface, and this data is from 1996 to 2016. And as you may know, the increase in impervious surface is really concerning, as it can cause an increase in stormwater runoff and even increase the velocity of flows during major flood events. Now, just with these flood-related threats in mind, I want to talk about how nature-based solutions can specifically turn out to be beneficial in addressing them. So to begin with, nature-based solutions, it's an umbrella term. You may have heard green infrastructure or ecosystem-based adaptation. And the reason that nature-based solutions are a good choice in flood mitigation is because they can easily mimic pre-disturbance hydrologic patterns. They allow for stream stabilization while at the same time adding to our socioeconomic and environmental resilience. So these nature-based solutions, they span across a wide range of actions and practices, and the overarching goal is to conserve, restore, or better manage our natural ecosystems. So moving to the next slide. Here are just a couple examples of some nature-based solutions, and it includes natural features, so wetlands and forests, but also approaches such as conservation easements and practices. And I want to talk a little bit about conservation practices. There are just so many studies, even by USDA, that shows a positive relationship between the soil organic matter and its water holding capacity. So what that means is that there's this really interesting review article which found that just increasing organic matter by 1% could increase the available water capacity by about 3,400 gallons per acre. So, so this is just an example of couple of nature-based solutions that that exist. But moving on, I want to highlight some of these strategies in detail. Starting with stream restoration, which is basically when you reestablish the structure, function, and self-sustaining behavior of a stream system. And here's a really interesting example of the stream restoration project, which I'm sure many of you are familiar by the San Antonio River Authority. So prior to restoration, there was erosion and an increased stormwater runoff at the site. And then the River Authority, they restored the stream channel and riparian areas using natural stabilization methods to create or mimic more of the natural flow or the conditions. And of course, this helps in mitigating floods and protecting the floodplain communities downstream as well. And Danielle is going to talk more about more interesting river restoration projects in one of her case studies. But moving on to low impact development. So this includes a variety of development practices, perhaps including bioretention ponds and rain gardens and permeable pavements, as you can see in these pictures below. But the goal is to help in the infiltration and reducing the burden on stormwater systems. And this is really important, as I mentioned earlier, the increase in impervious surfaces that has taken place over the last 20 years or so. So if you look on the graph on your right side of your screen, it basically shows that the low impact development, it decreases the runoff flow rate and takes relatively less time to infiltrate if you compare it to other traditional forms of development that uses impervious surfaces. Moving on to other examples of nature-based solutions. So some of these examples include conservation easements and buyouts. So conservation easements is when a landowner voluntarily gives an easement holder, this could be a land trust or public agencies, with the goal of limiting the use of their land to promote conservation. Then buyouts, it includes removing built structures from areas vulnerable to flooding, and this is typically done through voluntary purchases. And again, I'm the theory person, so Danielle will provide excellent examples of how these approaches have actually worked in practice. But moving on to wetland restoration and constructed wetlands. And there are so many benefits to this, from flood protection to water filtration, but honestly a really interesting one, and something I never thought of it directly, but the Invista wetland in Victoria has actually become the site where teachers at the Victoria School District, they bring students to conduct hands-on lab experiments specifically for the wetland curriculum. So not just flood protection, but think about the education benefits that these kids are getting from having these natural sites in place. And then finally, living shorelines. So this includes a range of shoreline stabilization techniques using a combination of oyster reefs or native vegetation with the goal of reducing coastal erosion and stabilizing the shorelines. So talking about co-benefits, and I hinted at here and there, but a really strong point in favor of nature-based solutions is that the benefits are not just limited to flood protection, rather they provide a lot of additional co-benefits to our environment, recreation, and water quality improvements. And this is one of my favorite studies in terms of water quality improvement. The researchers, they compared two regional detention facilities with constructed wetlands in McAllen, Texas. And they did this over a period of 22 months and for different extent and magnitude of storm events. So their study and the data they collected, it showed that the site with larger constructed wetlands and wet detention ponds, it performed better when it comes to reducing suspended solids and pollutant concentration, and just improving overall water quality. Then I also mentioned educational opportunities earlier, but wetlands and urban parks and beaches, they also provide recreational ecosystem services and avenues for outdoor tourism. Again, a major socioeconomic driver in the state. And there are also other co-benefits like green spaces, improving human health and well-being, and definitely a huge role in improving mental health being. Then green roofs also lower the urban heat island effect by absorbing excess heat, and all of these are heavily backed by scientific literature. So for the sake of time, I do want to point out this resource packet that we have at our website on Texas Living Waters site, and I'll post the link in chat, but the resource packet actually contains an annotated bibliography with all these research articles and case studies and a lot of other publications that can help you get a more in-depth understanding of these benefits. I do want to mention that these co-benefits should also be a really important consideration when thinking about new projects. And almost any time, if you are comparing between a green or gray infrastructure solution, if you factor in these co-benefits, it really helps us see the true value and a more comprehensive picture for nature-based solutions. And then, of course, let's not forget all the intangible benefits like the education opportunities or other ecosystem services that may not be as directly quantifiable. But I think I'm going to hand it over to Danielle now to take it from here and talk about those case studies and other recommendations.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Arsam. So I'd like to start the second part of the presentation by discussing how nature-based infrastructure can symbiotically work with traditional infrastructure in hybrid solutions. So in many cases, combining green and gray infrastructure can provide the most amount of flood protection while safeguarding traditional infrastructure investments and providing those additional co-benefits that Arsen just talked about. So first, floodplain preservation can lower costs for gray infrastructure by storing floodwaters and lowering flood levels. This reduces normal wear and tear and improves the resilience of built structural solutions. One example of this is the chain of wetlands in the Dallas floodway extension area. When the Trinity's water rises, the chain of wetlands located in this extension is converted into a reservoir, and it gets filled with all the floodwaters. The floodwater detention areas and wetlands work in conjunction with the Lamar levee that's built upstream. This project, once completed, is expected to reduce the Trinity River's flood level by about 4 feet in urban corridors, providing 800-year flood event protection. Second, distributed low-impact development and green infrastructure projects, such as green roofs and riparian buffers, can lower costs for stormwater infrastructure and can help remove pollutants before being received by treatment facilities. Now, the picture on your right is on the bottom is an example of one of these low-impact development features located in the San Antonio River Authority's Euclid location. This rain garden pictured here can capture and treat 10,000 gallons of runoff. Now, as many green infrastructure projects can be combined together, they can have a duplicative effect across the watershed, which we will talk about later as well. So next, I wanted to walk through a couple of case studies to really highlight the efficacy of nature-based solutions. First, I want to start with a recent study. Oh, and I just want to mention also that all of these examples, except for one, is located in Texas. So the first example kind of compares 2 bayous in the Houston region. So it compares Buffalo Bayou, which is on your left, and Brays Bayou, which is on your right. Now, despite having similar levels of urbanization in both regions, Buffalo Bayou is characterized by natural drainage and setbacks, and Brays Bayou is largely channelized. Now, a study recently done at Rice University shows that Buffalo Bayou, which remains one of the few natural riparian waterways in Houston, is more successful at minimizing adverse impacts of urban development on riverine flooding over time, whereas Brays Bayou is increasingly prone to flooding. So these results indicate that natural systems' capacity to adapt to changing land use and land cover over time is greater in the Buffalo Bayou drainage system versus the Brays Bayou. So studies like these are really starting to beginning to provide hard evidence that challenges kind of traditional techniques for flood mitigation. The report, however, does recognize some limitations in floodplain restoration in highly urbanized and channelized systems and provides recommendations for fully urbanized watersheds such as Brays, where setbacks would be impracticable. These recommendations include preservation of open space and native land cover, and repurposing existing green spaces such as parks and golf courses to serve as additional flood detention areas. Now, an example of that second recommendation is Exploration Green, which is located in Webster, Texas. Exploration Green is located on the southeast edge of Houston, just blocks from NASA's Johnson Space Center. This project converted part of a golf course into a series of detention basins, open space, and wetland areas. Under flood conditions, the combined storage capacity of this project is supposed to be 1,700 acre-feet of water, providing protection to over 16,000 homes in the immediate area. Exploration Green provides not only those essential flood mitigation benefits to the region, but also great habitat for fish and birds. Next, the San Antonio River Improvements Project was a $384 million investment by the City of San Antonio, Bexar County, San Antonio River Authority, and the Corps. This project included various flood control features, ecosystem restoration, and recreational improvements along 13 miles of the San Antonio River. Here, the river improvement project involved ecosystem restoration efforts, which rebuilt natural river features and planted native vegetation and trees near the river's edge. The roots of these native plants grow much longer than turf grasses and help stabilize banks and allows floodwaters to slow down and infiltrate into the soils during large rain events. The riparian vegetation also works to improve water quality by filtering runoff before entering into the river system. It also provides numerous recreational benefits for people around the area. Moving on, we want to highlight the green infrastructure projects that have been funded by SARA. To date, 40 projects have been funded with $1.6 million invested. These projects have utilized a variety of green infrastructure techniques, including bioswales, green roofs, and permeable pavement. In all, these 40 projects have worked to control 34 million gallons or 104 acre-feet of water. And in addition to these flood mitigation benefits, these projects have added co-benefits of treating hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of stormwater, purifying that stormwater and removing nitrogen and suspended solids. These distributed projects are the rough equivalent of 104 acre-feet detention pond and only cost marginally more, around 10%, using an estimated construction cost for detention ponds. However, in these costs are not calculated all of the co-benefits that are shown here and that Arsum has talked about previously. Now, for the last case study, I just wanted to highlight the efficacy of living shorelines as compared to other hardened structures along the coast. Now, this study by Smith et al. Looks at the living shoreline effectiveness in North Carolina, and it was before and after a Hurricane Matthew. And it showed that living shorelines are more resilient to storms and provide more protection than bulkheads. The reason being is that during large storm events, bulkheads they might get degraded and the landward elevation may drop. Versus living shorelines, there can be accretion after large rain events and storm events, allowing for a more resilient structure overall. Now, moving on, I wanted to highlight that the regional flood planning groups will be asked to look at potential use of federal funds or other funding sources as a component of your work. And luckily, there's a lot of federal, state, and local funding sources available for nature-based solutions. Here I've highlighted a couple of federal funding sources where you can fund nature-based solutions with. There's FEMA's Novel Building Resilient Infrastructures and Communities program, or BRIC. Of course, the HUD CDBG MIT program and the NRCS program. There's also local funding sources such as the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and FIF, and the local rebate programs and bond programs as well around the state. One thing that I want to note, in addition to having a lot of funding sources available for nature-based solutions, there are also often prioritization points that are given to nature-based projects, putting them above other more traditional projects. And not only are there additional prioritization points for a lot of these funding sources, but there also might be more grant opportunities available for those greener projects, like the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and FIF's priority points that are given to nature-based projects. So moving on, another task for the Regional Flood Planning Group will be to identify previous evaluations and analyses that combine recommendations for the region. And there are many documents and reports and plans that have been developed across your region that really try to adopt nature-based solutions for flood mitigation and for other purposes. So taking a look at those reports will be really helpful moving forward. And lastly, we just want to recognize that across the region, different areas have various levels of vulnerability. And it is very important to know where existing infrastructure is located and how future infrastructure can reduce those vulnerabilities to certain areas. And just thinking about all the different co-benefits that nature-based solutions can provide to already vulnerable areas may be really helpful as well. And so with that, we'd just like to thank you for your work in the region and for everything that you guys are doing. We will stick around for a minute or two if anybody has any questions, but we want to put up our contact information in case anyone has any questions or comments, and then we'd be happy to get to you offline as well.
Danielle, Arson, thanks so much for the presentation. Great job. Let me open it up for questions if anybody in our committee has any questions or comments.
I'll just add a comment. I do, as y'all all know here, but I just want to make say it for the record that the River Authority has done quite a bit of work on nature-based solutions in this basin. And I think that in the master plans, as was mentioned by Aaron, some of the stream restoration concepts and all have been identified and have the opportunity for those projects to move forward. So I just wanted to offer them as experts as well on nature-based solutions within the basin.
Appreciate that good comment. I will tell you, speaking from the perspective of the city of San Antonio, I know we have invested and done quite a bit of work also in developing green infrastructure within our city. One of the issues that always comes up happens to be with the maintenance of this infrastructure. Danielle or Arthur, you guys speak, make a couple of comments about the maintenance that you're seeing in some of these projects, the long-term maintenance.
Arson, did you want to speak about that?
Yeah, sure. I think first I want to talk about the good thing about nature-based solutions is how they're self-sustaining and self-recovering. If you think about a major storm event or major hurricane event, so that adds to the maintenance cost that we're talking about. So I work in the coastal region, so talking from a coastal perspective, if it's a seawall or a living shoreline, the living shoreline is going to be self-recovering after a major hurricane event as compared to the cost you will be putting into reconstructing the seawall or maintaining it. So I think that adds to the cost benefit. And again, going back to the co-benefits that we're talking about, the recreational opportunities, the money that comes from having thriving wildlife in the region. I think if you take all that into account, the maintenance cost, the benefits outweighs the maintenance cost. What do you think, Danielle?
Yeah, I think it does take a bit of extra planning. There, we recognize that new plans will have to be developed by entities in order to train workforces in order to be able to maintain nature-based infrastructure systems. But as Arson was saying, there are so many additional co-benefits associated with these projects, and they can really build stronger over time as well. The more established they are, the better they are at treating wastewaters, at allowing water to infiltrate. So I think having a longer term outlook or scope for costs might be needed in some circumstances. And just recognizing all the other additional benefits that come with nature-based solutions versus more hardened infrastructure. So we definitely recognize that maintenance, at least when you're starting off, it's going to take a lot more planning and training.
I certainly agree with your comment of making sure that those that there's plenty of planning up front, making sure that those that are going to be maintaining that are a part of the initial design. That's kind of a big lesson learned that we've had at the city, because we certainly see the benefits from a resilience perspective with green infrastructure. And I also wanted to compliment you and thank you for making the mention that flood benefits can be achieved through a combination of a hybrid method where you're looking at both green and gray infrastructure. Particularly in our region where we have a lot of plays, it becomes a challenge to go full green. I think sometimes, but there's certainly ways around it, and there's certain ways that we can do it. But I agree with the comment about resilience. So thank you for your presentation. And any other comments from the group? Hearing none, then we thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to the next slide. Agenda now, number 11.
We do not have any public comments. If there are those in the audience who would like to make public comment, you may stand up and do so now.
Okay. Just a quick reminder, our next meeting is scheduled for August. So we're going to have the entire summer off, huh? Take pictures of your vacations and please share them with us. We'll see you guys on August 17th, and we will have a presentation by the USGS by then. Hopefully they'll be ready. Any other comments or anything from the committee that maybe you would like to add? Hearing none, then we'll go on to item number 12, which is, number 13, which is adjourn. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I get a second? Second. And we're adjourned.
Thank you very much, everyone.